In a conflict that has been raging on since 2011, with major powers siding for their own interest and that of others, what is the possible solution now for war-torn Syria? With President Donald Trump now withdrawing troops from the country, how will this move shape the future of Syria? Let's find out on this episode of The Brief. Hello and welcome to The Brief. I'm Jafar Hasnan. With the loss of almost 1 million people in the Syrian civil war, ranging from army personnel to human rights activists and innocent men, women and children, how much more time would it take for leaders to identify real problems and ways to address them? Undertaking years of military and political activity in the region, the United States is now withdrawing its forces from Syria in what President Donald Trump calls an end of his objective, which was the elimination of Daesh under his presidency. Now, what effects it might have and in which direction would diplomacy turn is a question that still remains unanswered. With the threat of Daesh now over, as per the US President Donald Trump, what might these policy changes bring for Syria now? Will the regime forces take over what they have lost, or will further chaos unfold? What we know for a fact, although a tough issue between Ankara and Washington, is that the US support for the PKK will fall in rapid decline and will give Turkish forces the upper hand in containing the problematic situation in northern Syria. As the situation unfolds, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has announced a full-scale offensive in the east of Euphrates against the PKK terrorist organization and its Syrian offshoot, the YPG-PYD. And the operation that will go into effect will not only ensure a complete wipeout of this growing issue, but will also help reinforce a route through which many Syrians will be liberated and allowed to go back to their homes. Now, to set up the discussion for today, let's take a look at this fact report.
We've been fighting for a long time in Syria. I've been president for almost 2 years, and we've really stepped it up. And we have won against ISIS. We've beaten them, and we've beaten them badly. We've taken back the land, and now it's time for our troops to come back home.
The United States is preparing to withdraw its military forces from northern Syria.
Now we've won. It's time to come back. They're getting ready. You're going to see them soon. These are great American heroes. These are great heroes of the world because they fought for us, but they've killed ISIS, who hurts the world.
United States President Donald Trump previously announced his intention to withdraw United States soldiers from Syria. A US official has also said that the United States is considering a total withdrawal of US forces from Syria as it nears the end of its campaign to retake all the territory once held by Daesh. The remarks came after Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan signalled for a new counter-terror operation east of the Euphrates.
Yaklaşık 500 kilometrelik sınır hattı boyunca özellikle de Amerikan askerlerine asla zarar vermeyecek şekilde kendi planlamamıza uygun yerlerden Suriye topraklarındaki operasyonlarımıza her an başlayabiliriz.
Turkey has always called on the United States to cut ties with the PYD-YPG, recognised as the PKK terrorist organisation's Syrian offshoot by Turkey.
Sayın Trump'la konuştuk. Fırat'ın doğusuna bu teröristlerin gitmesi lazım. Eğer gitmezse o zaman biz göndereceğiz. Çünkü bizi rahatsız ediyorlar.
The United States has about 2,000 troops on the ground in the war-torn country. Turkey is determined to eradicate terrorist elements both within its borders and across the region for not only its national security but also for the benefit of the entire region.
Bölgedeki son teröristi etkisiz hale gelene kadar Suriye topraklarını karış karış tarayacağız.
Now, as the US President Donald Trump has announced that the US will be withdrawing its troops from Syria, here is a map which shows where exactly are the US troops based in Syria. Now, this black line here is the border Turkey shares with Syria. And about down 40 kilometers south, you can see this area with the stripes. This is the area which Turkey wants to secure. And if you go further down, that also belongs to PYD, YPG. Now, the U.S. has its forces in these particular areas where you can see the U.S. flags. Now, also, the U.S. has been using the M4 highway to provide arms to the Syrian offshoot of the PKK organization called YPG and PYD. And the black spots you see here, the black circles, are the arsenal armory of the YPG here. And talking about Turkey, Turkey has conducted 2 military operations in Syria in order to liberate these regions of Daesh, PYD, YPG terrorists. They took place in the first one happened in Euphrates Shield. That was called the Euphrates Shield, and it took place in this particular area. The second one was called Operation Olive Branch, and that took place in Afrin. So the whole map of Syria is very complicated now, and in order to discuss this further, joining me now, I would like to bring in my panel for today is Mr. Matthew Bryza, who is the former U.S. ambassador to Azerbaijan. And in Ankara, we have Ozkan Erbay, and she is the bureau chief for Daily Sabah in Ankara. First of all, thank you to both of you for being with us. Let me start with you, Matthew. Now, mission accomplished for the United States. Is that true or not? Was it a premature decision by the U.S. President Donald Trump to withdraw its troops from Syria?
Well, it's mission accomplished in terms of the original definition of the mission, which was to destroy the caliphate, the political organization of ISIS or Daesh. But as often happens, I think that the requirements of the mission evolved or expanded over time and came to include constraining Iran as well as Russia, but also making sure that stability was fully restored in northern Syria. And that means making sure that ISIS or Daesh can't resurge, can't reconstitute itself. So that part of the mission has not been achieved. And many commentators in Washington, and I think even senior members of President Trump's administration, like Secretary of Defense Mattis, or like National Security Advisor Bolton, or like the Special Envoy for defeating ISIS, Daesh, Brett McGurk, they, as recently as 10 days ago, were saying that the United States would need to remain engaged in northern Syria for the foreseeable future. In fact, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dunford, said, I think on December 10th, that the job of training the militia, unfortunately the YPG, but the Kurdish militia, to defeat ISIS once and for all, was only 20% complete. So if the goal was to eliminate the caliphate, mission accomplished. But if the goal is the broader set of objectives I just articulated, it's nowhere near accomplished.
All right, now going to Ankara, where we have Ms. Ozkan Erbay. My first question to you, first of all, what is the Turkish reaction to the U.S. withdrawal from Syria? According to reports, some people are saying that it happened after the conversation between the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and the U.S. President Donald Trump. So what's your take on this?
Yeah, actually, we have seen the reports from Washington, from the all agencies, reporting and stating that this decision of Trump, Mr. Trump, President Trump, was taking after the but speeded up, especially after President Erdogan's conversation with the Trump last Friday. So we know Turkey's intensified pressures on U.S. policy in Syria. In terms of supporting YPG and PKK in northern Syria. So Turkey actually approached to the stage of almost like deal will be done if you are not just cutting your support to PKK terrorist organizations, offshoots in northern Syria, so or any other aims to establish another entity in northern Syria. So we have seen Turkey's intensified intensified pressure on U.S. government. But personally, the conversation between President Erdogan and President Trump seems that, the decision was speeded up by particularly from President Trump. So what is it, Ankara's reaction, the first initial reaction to the U.S. Withdrawal from Syria, is that it seems more cautious in early hours. So we have seen the press meeting between President Erdogan and Iranian President Rouhani today. So there wasn't any indication or indicator that Turkey applauds to this decision or opposed to this decision. So probably we will need more time to see Turkey's reaction, leaving the cautious stage, at least to see what will be the further steps from United States, from Washington, to eliminate, getting out from the Syria, but what will be the existence in YPG in northern Syria? What will the arm situation, actually, the 20,000 truck arms and ammunitions that were given to PKK? So what will be the situation in the ground? So there are a lot of questions. Maybe we can elaborate in next hour. So, but Turkey's recent initial reaction is more cautious.
When the U.S. President Donald Trump says that there's no threat of Daesh anymore in Syria, what does Turkey think? What is Turkey's stance on this?
Yeah, actually, Turkey knew that from the beginning, actually, when the Daesh was emerged in 2012. So Turkey knew that, or Turkey was thinking that Daesh was not a major, that much big, major scale threat anymore, especially in the last couple years. So Turkey knew that there are approximately 1,000 or a couple thousand Daesh terrorists on the ground. So it could be eliminated, not with the heavy armors, heavy operations, but some airstrikes will be adequate to eliminate Daesh. So Daesh, Turkey thought that Daesh was used by the United States administration as a leverage to support YPG, especially in the last couple of years by the U.S. administration.
Okay, now coming back to you, Matthew. Not long ago, the U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton said that the U.S. troops will remain in Syria as long as there are Iranian-backed forces in Syria. So why is there a shift in its stance now? So does that mean that the U.S. does not see Iran as a threat anymore?
No, the U.S. definitely sees Iran as a threat. And in fact, for President Trump, Iran is one of the greatest national security threats that exists for the United States. So therefore, I think what this whole episode shows is that, frankly, there's not a strong process to coordinate foreign policy making in Washington right now. I served on the White House staff for 4 years on national security policy making, and we had a rigorous process according to which each administration entity, each agency or ministry that had an interest in an issue had a chance to debate it with their counterparts. And over the course of sometimes months, a decision would arise and the president would have to approve or disapprove it. That's not what's happening in this case. In this case, I think that the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, and the National Security Advisor, as you just said, had a very different view of what the decision should be than what President Trump just decided. So, in other words, this was a case of President Trump maybe waking up or just suddenly feeling or being inspired by President Erdogan's conversation with him that the U.S. policy had to change radically. And frankly, even though there is this negative aspect that I described in my first response about making it harder for the U.S. to play a positive role in generating stability in Syria, I think that for U.S.-Turkish relations, this is a great moment. This is an instance of President Trump choosing Turkey over terrorists, choosing its NATO ally over the YPG. And so I think from that perspective, President Trump did the right thing. Therefore, what needs to happen, and what I hope will happen, is that Turkey will now take on the responsibility of stabilizing northern Syria, that responsibility that the U.S. was carrying out, albeit with the wrong partner. And I think, building on what Nurhan said a few minutes ago, the reticence or the relative quiet with which Turkey has received this decision by President Trump maybe reflects the big responsibility that perhaps Ankara has just taken on, given that the U.S. troops will leave. And if Turkey wants to create a stable and YPG-free northern Syria, it's its responsibility now to act. And from the U.S. perspective, I think that's a good thing, because Turkey is our NATO ally with the second largest military of any NATO member after the United States.
Okay, Matthew, one more question I would like to add here. Now, when the U.S. President Donald Trump says that there would be a withdrawal of the U.S. troops from Syria, does that mean a complete withdrawal, given the fact that the U.S. still has troops in Iraq which are capable of launching strikes to Syria? So how does that work out?
Yeah, that's a really thoughtful question. It's not clear. Again, as you just said, President Trump has said immediate withdrawal. Well, that immediate doesn't mean tomorrow. It does mean tomorrow or today for the State Department personnel on the ground. They should be already gone. But for the U.S. military, it will take some time for them to leave. But regardless of that, you're right. There will be these U.S. military forces in Iraq next door. But I think, understanding, knowing, having participated in these sorts of decisions in the past in the White House, I think that you wouldn't see the U.S. forces on the ground in Iraq coming into Syria unless there was a grave emergency, so important that there wasn't time to bring U.S. forces from the United States. So most likely those U.S. forces based in Iraq will continue to do their important mission in Iraq. And if, God forbid, things deteriorate in Syria after this pullout, my guess is President Trump could perhaps decide to send the troops back in from other bases, but not from Iraq. But all that said, I think it's highly unlikely that President Donald Trump will decide to send U.S. forces back into Syria, whether they're from Iraq or from the United States, because bringing those troops home was one of his campaign pledges. And love him or hate him, one thing about President Trump is he is making a point to fulfill his election campaign pledges.
Okay, now, coming back to you, Ms. Erbay, in Ankara, now Turkish officials have earlier said that they expect the U.S. to act in accordance with common understanding reached between both parties. So what kind of cooperation will Ankara expect from the U.S. after its withdrawal from Syria?
Yes, Turkey expects full coordination with the U.S. in terms of understanding, intense understanding of Turkey's national security concerns and considerations from the beginning. So from now on, after the decision of Trump administration, I mean the President Trump himself, shall we say, so Turkey expects from President Trump or Trump administration to implement withdrawal policy with considering Turkey's national security concerns. Again, I said before in the beginning, so where the PKK, YPG existence will be evolved after this withdrawal, and what will be the future of observation points that were actually established in last couple months, and what will the future of the coalition, which was consisted of 73 countries, and so who will lead, and what country or what countries Turkey will be talking in terms of the coalition. And also, again, the most important thing is what will be the next move on the arms and weapons which were delivered to PKK. So for the initial point, Turkey expects full coordination with the U.S. in terms of intelligence, in terms of transferring the information of the PKK, YPG notions in the northern Syria right now. And what will be the next step to eliminate eliminate them to the end. So withdrawing from the Syria for U.S. it shouldn't. It doesn't seem precipitate action actually, but of course there should be next moves planned, next moves by the Trump administration. Probably Turkey wants to know what will be the next steps are.
Okay, now, Matthew, I think a key point brought up by Ms. Erbay in Ankara, that what happens to the weapons given to the Syrian offshoot of PKK-YPG in Syria, given the fact that there would be no U.S. troops on ground. So how will the U.S. regulate these weapons?
Key question indeed. And you know, I think it was both President Obama and President Trump who have said that those weapons provided by the U.S. to the YPG will be collected and controlled by the U.S., and it's impossible if there aren't U.S. troops on the ground. But I would advise, if I were asked, I would advise the Turkish government to try to look past that issue for now, because I think it's probably in Turkey's interest to have those U.S. forces leave northern Syria so that the YPG is alone, not receiving any more support from the U.S., and then Turkey has the opportunity to deal with that national security threat, as Turkey sees it, as it sees fit. So, in other words, maybe it's time for Turkey to move forward and take now its destiny into its own hands, because it has a great opportunity to do so.
Okay, now, Matthew, my last question to you, actually. Where do you see the future of Syria after the withdrawal of U.S. troops? And also, actually, let me add one thing here. Now, many people, especially the critics of Donald Trump, are saying that it's a victory for Putin and Russia. What's your take on this?
This is definitely not a victory for President Putin. I mean, Russia is, compared to the United States, is not in the same league in terms of power. It has a strong military. It has a strong nuclear arsenal. It does not have a military that is anywhere near the strength of the U.S.'s, and economically, Russia's a paper tiger. So I don't believe that Russia will be able to stabilize Syria. If you look at the history of the former Soviet Union or Russia, there are 0 cases that I can remember when Russia has ever stabilized and rebuilt a country that had been in war. I mean, other than itself, after the Napoleonic Wars and after World War II, after World War I, World War II. So I am certain that President Putin will try to pretend that this is a great victory for Russia, but it's not. This is a case of President Trump living up to his campaign promise. So that gets to, and we've sort of stepped into the question of what will happen in Syria in the future. And nobody knows. But I think that Turkey can play a major role now in shaping the situation. With the U.S. forces gone, U.S. diplomacy has lost a lot of its strength. So if I were in power right now, or still in the U.S. government, I would say in this situation, the U.S. needs to look to Turkey. Washington needs to look to Ankara to be that NATO ally who's there on the ground, whose strategic interests are the same as the U.S.'s. Based on all my contacts with very senior level people in the Turkish government, I see the U.S. and Turkey fundamentally on the same side once the YPG is removed from the equation. Neither Washington nor Ankara wants Assad to stay in power. Neither Washington nor Ankara wants ISIS or Daesh to be powerful. Both Washington and Ankara want to maintain the territorial integrity of Syria. Both Washington and Ankara want to limit the influence of both Iran and Russia in Syria. I don't need to remind Turkish viewers that Turkey's fought more wars against Russia than against any other country throughout history. So I think the strategic building blocks are common between Turkey and the United States. So what will happen? I don't know exactly what it will be. No one does. But Turkey can play a big role. And my guess is there's the electoral process that's going to come up for the new leader of Syria. I think Russia is going to try to bend that process so that Bashar al-Assad stays in power. And I hope that the U.S. and Turkey will work together to make sure that the Syrian people get an honest decision as to who will be there. And then, of course, there's Iran, as I said, and I think Iran will probably strongly want to see Assad remain in power as well.
All right. Matthew Bryza, a former U.S. ambassador to Azerbaijan, thank you very much for your analysis on this issue.
Thank you.
And now we will continue with Ms. Nur Ozkan Erbay in Ankara. Let me ask you now that Turkey is planning a counterterrorism operation in Syria. Now, it's third of its kind. So do you think that the withdrawal of the U.S. troops from Syria will somehow affect this planned operation?
Yeah, first of all, maybe before analyzing or giving a projection, possible projections to Turkey's potential operation towards the Eastern Euphrates, I would like to add something to Ambassador Bryza's comments on the gesture. Maybe the withdrawal of the U.S. Could be perceived as a gesture to Turkey. So I think this is kind of problematic in terms of couple facts. So we didn't see, at least Ankara didn't see, Turkey's designation of YPG as a terrorist organization at first hand. So another thing is Washington might seek for some power struggle after this withdrawal, after U.S. withdrawal from Syria. So this power struggle means, I will elaborate on it, might be created might want to be created between Russia and Turkey, or Iran and Turkey. So, but after today's picture with Rouhani, President Erdogan and President Rouhani underlined that they're in full coordination and understanding to pursue a political solution in Syria. So my point is that if it's a gesture, we have to see more concrete steps in order to siding with Turkey or terrorist organization, siding with NATO ally or a terrorist organization. Okay, if it is so, if the U.S. siding with NATO ally again, so they have to designate YPG as a terrorist organization, let's say. About the possible potential operation towards Eastern Euphrates, so Turkey seems ready on the border, along the border in 400 kilometers. So got the whole preparations on for possible operation. But after this U.S. withdrawal decision from Syria, again, I was talking at the beginning, Turkey will approach more cautious. So we have to see Russia's reaction that was kind of narrowed today from President Putin's statement. So they were also surprised by their applause. He applauds U.S. decision withdrawing from the Syria. But we didn't see at least Iran, Russia, and Turkey. A trilateral meeting will be held in next month, probably for the Astana process. So we will, Turkey and Ankara will have a sense that what will be the Russia's and Iran's reaction about the possible operation towards Eastern Euphrates after the U.S. decision from withdrawing from Syria.
Okay, now, Ms. Erbay, let me ask you, do you think that the U.S. withdrawal from Syria was something long coming? If we look at the summit which took place in Istanbul, the U.S. was not included in that summit. It was Germany, France, Russia, and Turkey. So is it like all these countries wanted the U.S. out of the Syrian civil war?
Yes, definitely. My answer will be yes. It's a clear fact that the Russia's increasing pressure on U.S. existence in Syria, also Turkey's intensified pressure on U.S. Supporting existence of YPG and PKK in northern Syria, particularly. So public diplomacy, in terms of public diplomacy and in terms of power struggle and power balances, U.S. administration seem to have losing blood, actually, to prove their legitimacy to be exist in Syria.
All right. Now let me bring in our next guest for the brief today, which is Mr. Sergei Markov in Russia, who is a Russian political scientist. First of all, thank you very much, Mr. Markov, for being with us on the brief. Let me start by asking you, Now, the Russian Foreign Ministry welcomed the move, according to the TAS news agency, saying that a withdrawal created prospects for a political settlement in Syria. So, what is the Russian take on the U.S. withdrawal from Syria?
I think Moscow are very glad that the United States decided to withdraw its troops from Syria because we didn't think that the United States helped a lot to fight against Daesh Islamic State. Maybe a little bit help, but not too much. And in fact, Daesh and Islamic State have been created in big measures because of political mistakes of the United States, which they made in Iraq and Syria. Also, Moscow many times stressed that the United States sent its troops to Syria with a root violation of international law, because it was no decision of Security Council of the United Nations. It was also no invitation of Syrian government to the United States to send its troops. So it was a violation of international law. Also, United States support Kurdish and another military groups which control Syrian territory, and we did allow Syrian government to organize the lives there. So now, when United States withdraw, the new circumstances for the moving from the military civil war to the political discussion about new peaceful life in Syria became more and more possible. United States in Syria was not side for the peace. It was side for the war. When they withdraw, Russia liked.
Okay. Now, Ms. Erbay, let me ask you, how does this withdrawal affect the relationship between Turkey, Russia, and Iran? So, would you agree that this would reinforce the relationship among Turkey, Iran, and Russia?
Hello?
One of the outcomes of this withdrawal might be expected power struggle in Syria between three regional powers, Turkey, Russia, and Iran. But I don't foresee that struggle will be deeply affected on the ground because, as I said before, Turkey, Russia, and Iran have concluded that they all want to have a political solution and constitutional and territorial integrity. Whether it will be with Assad or not, of course, Turkey has some strong opposition to Assad regime, but I think they can tackle with this after all, after U.S. Withdrawal from the Syria. Probably the whole regional powers who has their own strongholds and influence in Syria, they can tackle and they can get over with this relatively small problems with the consensus and communication as they have. As they did so far.
Okay, now coming to Sergei Markov in Russia. Now, Sergei, Turkey has said that it will support Assad only if he is elected by the Syrian people. So, what would you like to say to that?
First of all, I think Turkey supported Bashar Assad before the civil war had been started. And in situation when Bashar Assad had been elected, under the condition, of course, not so much democratic ruling in Syria. Of course, it was authoritarian regime, and it stayed to be authoritarian regime in war. We will move from the war to the peace. More it will be circumstances for the political process, including general elections. I think that Bashar Assad has a very good chance to win presidential elections, first of all, because he is the winner of civil war, and people, the whole world, especially in the Arabic world, they like winners. And secondly, because Bashar Assad is very secure leader, a very liberal leader, by the way. That's why Syria, which is full of the ethnic and religious minorities, like Bashar Assad very well as the main force against radical jihadists such as Jabhat al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, and Islamic State.
Okay, now, Ms. Erbay, my last question to you. Where do you see the future of Syria after the withdrawal of U.S. troops? And if there's anything you would like to add to what Sergei Markov said, please do.
Yeah, actually, maybe I will. I have to add something for the sake of Syria, for the future of Syria. What is the still ongoing threat for Turkey is that the possibility of PKK's, YPG's reapproachment to the Assad regime after losing backing of the U.S. administration. So if it does so, if the PKK, YPG fractions get a support from the Assad regime, that will be a problem in terms of three regional powers, possible reconciliation over Syria. So again, if as United States, if the Iran and Russia tend to understand Turkey's national security concerns in terms of PKK, YPG, and Turkey is welcome, Ankara is welcome to listen Iran's and Syria's propositions, suggestions in Syria, as we have seen so far. So the Astana process, it is more actually the gifted process for the sake of Syria in terms of Ankara's view. So Sochi and Astana processes actually giving a chance for sustaining a sustainable solution for Syria. What I can add to Mr. Sergei, so Turkey understands Russia. Turkey understands Iran. So all three countries have been knowing each other for centuries. So probably this is a quite long humanitarian crisis in the human history. The all three regional powers should solve this problem. Other than that, no one can solve.
All right, Nur, Ozkan, Erbay in Ankara, thank you very much for talking to us on The Brief. Sergei, very quickly, same question for you. Where do you see the future of Syria after the withdrawal of U.S. troops?
I think that Syria will be partly divided. I think that British and Jordan troops will take control of part of the territory nearby Jordan border. And also Turkey, I think, will control directly some of the territories in the region of Manbij and by their proxies in Idlib province. And I think Kurds also will keep their control on the south territories, mostly settled by Kurdish people. But maybe they will leave those territories which is settled by Arabic population as now. And nevertheless, the majority of country will be under the control of the Bashar Assad, where will be some moderate political process and moderate opposition will take part and will build some kind of coalition government. Western countries, I think, will be not able to recognize this new Syrian political regime, new Syrian political system, because Western countries too much resist to the situation when it's going beyond their political will. They're still imperialist country and they doesn't like us.
All right, Sergei Markov in Russia, thank you very much for talking to us on The Brief. Now, the Syrian war has become a complex battlefield with many world leaders involved in de-escalating the conflict. With the latest announcements of the US President Donald Trump to withdraw troops from Syria, only time will tell how the move will affect the region and the countries involved in the seemingly never-ending conflict. I'm Jafar Hasnan, and that was today's brief.